But Che Bose, the famous political commentator in Ireland and a good friend of the show, is here to talk about all of these things. Che, welcome back on the mother of all talk shows. Let me start with Mountbatten. May I? Why is that not a massive story in Ireland?
Well, George, your introduction is very interesting and it's quite accurate. I suppose Lord Mountbatten was, of course, met a very grisly end here at the hands of the IRA. And I think the situation regarding his death, he was killed, assassinated by the Provisional IRA in the 1970s. I remember it well myself. There was a number of innocent people killed during that killing as well. I think that has contributed somewhat to a sense of deference to Lord Louis Mountbatten, as you say, King Charles's mentor and Uncle Louis, as he was well known. I think elements of the Irish press back in the 1970s did certainly try to expose Mountbatten's behaviour. But again, the politicisation of Mountbatten's death and murder. He lived in he had ownership of a huge castle called Classiebawn in County Sligo in the Republic of Ireland, and he often holidayed in that huge estate, and that fact of a lot of sort of concern that to expose him as a quite prolific paedophile, which is what he was, could sort of cause angst to the Free State government at the time.
Yeah, I mean, angst indeed. But now that we know what we know, that he was a prolific paedophile, and not only that, may have been fishing in the sordid pond of the Kincora boys' home, that makes the scandal of such proportions. After all, I mean, I just noticed, I didn't know about it, and I hesitate even to make the point, but one of the children in line for the throne, one of the children of Prince William, is called after him. The little boy is called Louis. They are still holding up a prolific paedophile as someone to be revered. It is still surprising, notwithstanding the point you make about the end he had, that this is not a major and burning issue, at least in the media, if not amongst the politicians.
Yeah, and it's important to mention that smaller publications, independent ones back at the time of his killing and subsequently, there was rumours about the Kincora boys' home. They were widely known. And there was also suggestions from very reliable sources that the Kincora boys' home was a part of a British intelligence web to entrap senior loyalist pro-British politicians in the north of Ireland and some from the south of Ireland as well, as part of a paedophile ring, and that the British intelligence services were actively involved in using the compromat gained at the time from the abuse of these children and these young boys, as you say, some of whom have now come forward to expose in great detail, I must say, and I've read some of the incredible work that the Village magazine has written about this. Michael Smith, the editor there, has done an incredible job, and another journalist by the name of De Burka have relentlessly pursued the story of the terrible abuse at the Kincora boys' home. I think it's a mixture of deference to Lord Louis, as he was known in Sligo, and it's also a real concern that if you lifted the lid on what was happening in Kincora, that nexus between the British security services in the north and in the south, and the complicity potentially there would potentially cause catastrophic revelations about some significantly wealthy and powerful people like Lord Louis Mountbatten.
Yeah, all the more reason to lift that lid so far as I'm concerned, but I take your point, of course. But it leads me neatly on to the next thing I wanted to ask you. I have many times been at events in the Free State where I was probably the strongest supporter of Irish reunification in the room. In other words, I was always conscious that there's a certain ambivalence in the South about the reunification of the country. Now, that was before the rise of Sinn Féin. I wonder if that means that's changed, but what's your take on that? How keen are the people in the Free State to see the 32-county republic?
Well, that's an interesting question, George, and it's one that is, I suppose, central right now to the political discourse in Ireland, but not as central as it should be. I suppose with Sinn Féin in a dominant position, north and south of the border, you could definitely say that there's a nationalist pro-unification party, are a definite majority on the island, as you very comprehensively introduced the political situation in Ireland. There is a preoccupation right now with the economic situation, the lack of housing, the failures in health, all delivered by these two uneasy but very snugly coalescing partners right now in the south. In the north, you very correctly outlined that the Roman Catholic population, for the first time since the establishment of the Northern Irish Statelet, which has to be said was essentially an apart.
I think we've got Che back again, have we? Let's see.
Sorry, George.
Che, thanks for that. You dropped out just as you were saying that the economic situation and the social situation in the Free State under this unholy coalition was beginning to get extremely worrisome for people. Do please continue.
Yeah, I mean, as you very rightly outlined, that there has been a coalescing dysfunction in Ireland. And the reason that coalition exists is solely to keep Sinn Féin, the nationalist pro-unity party, out of power. That's the only reason they exist. These are people who swore they'd rather drown in each other's blood than ever work together. But suddenly, as soon as Sinn Féin looked like they could form a government, or at least had a significant majority, they have coalesced. And they'll be in power for several years to come yet before a general election will be called. And I think when you consider the critical situation in Ireland regarding housing is the big issue right now, followed by healthcare. We have very dysfunctional housing and healthcare situation in Ireland. So, I mean, unity right now would certainly be, to the delight of the governing parties, quite a bit down the agenda for the general public. We've got rising inflation. We've got a huge accommodation crisis exacerbated by, I think, 60,000 Ukrainian refugees who are flowing into the country at the rate of about 1,000 a week. We've nowhere to accommodate these unfortunate people. They've been sleeping on the streets and in airports recently. So there are a lot of problems right now for this government. Unity, I think, for the vast majority of Irish people, certainly in the Republic, is something that we would aspire to. Have Sinn Féin thought out the realities of that unity? How do we incorporate Britishness into United Ireland? I think that's something that there's a dearth of exploration with the people who see themselves as British in the North. There's still a significant number of people who consider their identity to be British. And there's a lot of very interesting thinking going on about what a United Ireland could look like. It could be a federalised Ireland. It could be an Ireland based on different types of tax codes. It could be a complete, let's start and rebuild again. So I think people are willing to look at different ideas on a United Ireland, but the cost of it and the priority for that right now certainly wouldn't be at the top of the list for most worried and put to the collar tax payers on this island, either side of the border, I would suggest.
Yeah, I mean, who would be costed? This is not East Germany and West Germany, is it? The North is not a basket case. It's, I'm guessing, roughly economically comparable to the South, unless I've got that completely wrong. It's merely anecdotal as I go around from North to South. They don't look like a poor country and a rich one to me. And so the actual cost of unity, of one part having to subsidize the other, would not really be there unless you know different. But for the people in the north, there are even people who support unity. There are some real problems about uniting with the south. You've got to pay a lot of money to go and see a doctor in the south, which you don't in the north. The benefits are better in the north than they are in the south. Speak to that, Jay.
Yeah, absolutely. The Irish health system is for a very small population of about 5 million people. We pay more for healthcare than most other countries in the OECD, and we have worse health outcomes. The chief executive of our health service in the south, the state system, is paid over £400,000 sterling in real terms. So we pay a lot to our doctors, we pay a lot to our top-heavy bureaucracy, but we're getting terrible outcomes. We need a national health service in Ireland, and Sinn Féin are advocating for that, which is obviously free at the point of care for everybody in the north of Ireland. It's been a matter of great envy and admiration in the south. So I think there's certainly parts of the northern system that would be adopted gleefully in the south. And similarly, my point about the unification of the island not being at the top of the agenda right now is because there's such pressing issues with inflation, healthcare, and accommodation in the island. It's not to speak to any sort of idea that the passion for that doesn't exist. And regarding cost, the cost element would be a further fear factor added in by those who would be worried about unity and worried about that eventuality, George, just to clarify my point on that the cost can be huge or they can be small, but I think most economists would suggest and believe that a unified Ireland would be a far more smoothly run economy. I mean, the problems we're facing with the Irish Sea border and the protocol, etc., with the unionist politicians and the collapse of Stormont yet again on the basis of the resolution of that are all about the two jurisdictions on one very, very small island.
The people like you and me that support Irish unity, I've got to try harder to reassure the minority, as it now is, in the north, don't we? And you've spoken to some of the possibilities, federalism, binationalism. There's no reason, for example, why those who see their identity as British cannot be citizens of a united Ireland, but also citizens of Britain. There's no reason why we can't have the tunnel, the bridge, permanently connecting Scotland, not far from where I live, from Stranraer to Larne, roughly speaking. There are many confidence-building measures that could be taken. And maybe they are. I'm not that close to it anymore. But I don't hear enough of these reassuring noises, tone. The tone is not reassuring enough. And it needs to step up that, doesn't it?
I think absolutely. I think one of the big gaps in the Sinn Féin vision for a united Ireland, it's easy to say, we want a united Ireland. It's going to be great. We're all going to get on. What's the reality around that? There's a significant population in the north then who become a minority, a grieved minority. If we don't bring people into that shared vision and we don't allow them to have their inputs on symbols, which are very important in Ireland. As a Scotsman, will understand Celtic Rangers. Symbolism here is incredibly important. Many people have died for those symbols. So it's important that we bring those two shared cultures, which are very similar. The Scots and Irish cultures are similar in so many ways. I mean, genetically, we're essentially the same people to a great degree. I mean, my own DNA and my dad's, the only DNA we have other than Irish or Gaelic Irish is Scots. So we're very much brother nations in so many ways, culturally and historically as well. So I think there is a sense that we could create a new shared island, a vision for that. But the actual policies and the fora for that to be discussed with our Unionist and British friends and neighbours, is lacking. It's definitely lacking. I think the real effort must be looking for where the problems could be with a united Ireland, putting significant money, effort, and education into saying, look, this is a destination for us all. It's not a victory for one or a loss for another. The idea that the Scots Gaelic or the Unionist community is going to just jump on the ferry to from Larne to Stranraer and just head back to the United Kingdom if there was a vote of 51%, if you had the same vote that we got Brexit through on, to suggest that the Unionist population is going to fade off back to Scotland or to England, it's just so naive. So again, there is not enough investment and discussion about how we achieve this shared island. And it has to be done peacefully, because very quickly, as we've seen before here and all around the world, these ethno-nationalist conflicts can erupt into the most brutal affairs. And we suffered here on this island for decades and decades, and nobody wants to go back there.
Jay, it's not been a great line, but it's been a great conversation. Thanks very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows.